Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on Faith to Lead. I'm excited about this topic that we're going to cover today, and I think it's the greatest sense of appreciation every moment we have where we can have this conversation. I want to ask you this question. What does it mean to you to be a servant leader? And, we hear that term thrown around a lot, servant leadership. And now it's almost ubiquitous with I'm a leader or I'm a manager. But if someone were to ask you today, when you go to work, what are some things you have to do today that substantiate that you're a servant leader? Could you answer them? Well, we're going to unpack that right here on Faith to Lead, on what it means to be a servant leader. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to share this podcast. There might be some people on your team that you say, we should check this out to see how we could take our leadership to the next level. So you can share this podcast, subscribe to Faith to Lead, and you can also visit us at faithtolead.com where we have even more resources on this topic. Let me jump in by sharing with you just a little biblical text that comes out of the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 25 to 28. And it's because servant leadership, although it started right around 1970 by a man named Greenleaf who started doing a lot of the writing, it has a lot of biblical roots to it as well. And this is a scripture that says, but Jesus called them to himself, these are his disciples, and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. But this is the key verse. He says, yet it shall not be so among you. He's contrasting his leadership style from those that didn't follow him. He says, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. When you look at that particular scripture, we call this in the church that I lead, it's called the law of greatness. And what it does is it's basically a biblical text that says, if you want to be great, you got to first learn to serve. If you want to be the first in anything, you have to prioritize how useful you are to everyone else in your environment. It's true with people on a team. It's true when you're working on your own leadership stature so that people will see you as a leader and recognize you a leader. It's true on your team. It's true in your organization. If you want a great organization and you want it to be an industry leader, you have to prioritize how well do we serve everyone. And so the quality and the quantity of services, how people look at the products you're rendering and their satisfaction from it, that will determine how fast you rise. So we actually call that the law of greatness. So when you think of servant leadership, one great way you can look at it from a faith perspective is how well and how useful am I to everyone who's following me? Are they saying, man, I do better when that person's not even there? Man, I thrive better when my boss is out of the room. Man, we get things done when we have less organization. They hold us back. They impede progress. They stifle innovation. All of those mindsets, all of those behaviors, as well-intentioned as you may see them, are competing against servant leadership. First, let's talk about some of the preconditions. And here's where you see some of the misnomers of servant leadership throughout industry. It's before you find out what type of servant leader you should be or what behaviors you should do, you have to first assess the context that you're working in and the corporate culture. You see, if you're in the American Red Cross, Boy Scouts, youth sports, a church, a parish, and you're working with nonprofit individuals, there's levels of care you can demonstrate. There's styles of communication that are appropriate. But if you're in an ultra corporate setting, Wall Street, where certain things you can never say to someone else, there's levels of care that could be misinterpreted. I know you understand what I mean. Then you have to really be sensitive to your context and your culture about what's appropriate for you in demonstrating your care. So one of the first preconditions you want to figure out in your environment is what's the context? What's the culture? What's appropriate here? How can I demonstrate that I'm going to be useful? What's over the line? What's borderline? The second is you want to consider your own attributes. What are you authentically good at? What do you need to work on? What are some areas that you have to improve? And what are some things that no matter how much scholarship you do or how much personal development, you say, that's a level that I can't necessarily fulfill. That's where you would want to look at delegating and asking other people to help you along. And the third, and this is key, and this is where many people miss servant leadership, It's follower receptivity. How well do the people under you receive you? And that's something that they have to ask, how are they entering into the room? Is this a person that's inherently pessimistic? Is this a person that doesn't want to be there? Is this a person that has no passion for the company, the organization, the products, they're working there? They're just there to let time pass by. And sometimes we will look at a leader and, I'm going to encourage you today. Sometimes you'll do all that you can. Pour yourself out, empty yourself and say, am I not a good servant? Am I not a good leader? When maybe the issue is there's a wrong precondition. Think of it like healthcare. There's preconditions before you get a prescription. Maybe the wrong precondition is you have some toxic people in the room that no matter how much you extend yourself, they will not receive it. Many people don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. So you want to assess all of these conditions. Is this a place where if the leader is serving and useful, it will be received well? Is this an environment where the leader's natural attributes can shine in it? And how do we handle being useful and being encouraging to everyone else within this context and within this culture? And that may change from setting to setting. So let me share with you some basic principles based on theory. And we hear this stuff. There's all kinds of authorities on servant leadership. One's Nordhaus, one's Robert Greatleaf. And, there's this widespread notion that leaders, they inspire followers. As a leader, you're going to go and you're going to inspire your followers, and then your followers, based on that inspiration, will go ahead and perform all the work. However, servant leadership kind of looks at it a little differently. It says it's the act of a person who says, you know what, I'm going to put everyone who follows me first. I'm going to empower them. I'm going to help them develop their full personal capacity, all with a strong moral and ethical and virtuous component. That comes right out of an authority, Robert Nordhaus. And when you look at that, it's basically saying, when I go to work, I'm going to think of the people following me first. What's their needs? What's their concerns? What's their hopes? And I'm going to make that the number one priority on my list today. I'm going to put them first. And that will lead you to ask certain questions. And I want you to do this today. It's going to make you ask, what are the people that are following me? What's their highest priority needs? Do you know them? Have you looked at some of the people on your team and said, hey, in order for you to get your job done, what resources do you need the most? What are we specializing and emphasizing that needs to be minimized? And what are we minimizing that we need to start maximizing? What do we need to give attention to bring out your best? I want you to ask someone that exact question today. It will lead you to start to analyze, are the people under me growing? Are they developing? Do they feel freer because I'm here? Do they feel more autonomous that now I know what to do whether you're here or not, so that I feel like I could perform and thrive and excel? Are they naturally following your leadership style? I want you to check this out because this works. Servant leadership has been proving itself throughout industry now for several decades. But I want you to go ahead and share this podcast, all right? Make sure you don't listen to all this alone. I want you to share it. I want you to subscribe to the podcast. And also, you can visit us at faith2lead.com, where we have some questions and some ways that you can even get more information to find out how well you score and measure yourself on some of these aspects. But let me stop. Don't beat yourself up, because leadership is a process. It's a process between you and the people who are following you. But it's also a process for your development, just like following is a process of their development. You won't be able to accomplish all this in a day or in a night. Servant leadership has been studied since 1970. There's been some contemporary scholarship that has recently come out in the last few years on it. New studies, new assessments, new instruments, new tools. And the scholarship is continually moving itself forward. So don't beat yourself up. Just say, I need to learn, I need to grow. And as I learn and grow and I begin to exhibit some of these behaviors, my environment will continue to develop and to grow. When you look at another aspect of servant leadership, it emphasizes strong moral behavior. It's strong moral and ethical behavior to your followers, to the organization, every stakeholder, boards of directors, key clients, industry execs, your task environment, your banks, everyone. It's basically saying when they look at you, they say this person is a person who's inherently just. They want to do what's right. They're willing to have a negative result rather than compromise their integrity. They don't take shortcuts. They don't say, well, we'll do whatever we have to do to get anything done. They have some boundaries that they set. And sometimes people, they misconstrue leadership and they just say anyone who gets people to follow them is a leader. That's not necessarily true. Most of your academicians and your scholars have said, no, leadership implies a very instrumental ethical component. That if a person has a large group of followers and are guiding them to do immoral things, no one's calling that person a leader anymore. They're saying, yeah, that's a person that can marshal people. That's a person that can mobilize individuals, but leadership, no. So a leader must espouse some strong moral behavior. They're concerned about the people who don't have things just as much as the people who have them. Who are the people in our organization that are being marginalized, that are being pushed to the side, the people that have no voice, the people that feel like, I'm being treated unfairly or inequitably. Servant leadership says, I see them too. And I'm here to make sure that I'm being useful to them. I'm here to ensure that they can become actualized, that they can be in an environment where they can thrive, that they will become participators and not just spectators in this environment. And they can count on me to do that because I put them first also. So your servant leader has to espouse that. So today, when you go into your office, you look at your team, start trying to think of the people who may be marginalized, who have no voice, who are some of the have-nots. Think of them, think of your stakeholders and say, how can I be useful to all of them? Now, I want to give you some key practices of servant leadership, okay? And this is great. I had a chance to do some research on this, and this has proven itself in human resource departments across the nation, whether it's a small business, a startup, an emerging business, or whether you're a team leader or a global organization, it's all true. So I want you kind of listen to these different behaviors and score yourself and say, if I had to assess how well I'm doing, am I doing well in each of these aspects? And the first aspect of being a servant leader is how well do you listen? They call it listening. And it's the ability to walk into a room and say, before I say anything, let me make sure I'm accurately hearing everyone's concern, their challenge, their need. Do they acknowledge me as a person that's responsive to their needs, or do they acknowledge me as a person who's indifferent to their needs, that they don't even hear them? I've said this 1,000 times, and leadership will do nothing about it. So part of your communication style means you have to excel in accurately understanding everything that your team is saying when they say it. The second is empathy. It's when you can literally put yourself in your team's shoes. A great question to ask is, how well can you work for yourself? If you had to follow someone who's just like you, with all of your mood swings and all of your intensity and all of your intentionality or your communication style, would you follow it well? And so empathy is basically the opposite of indifference. It's saying, I know how they feel in this environment. I can put myself in their shoes. You can kind of leave your own experience, think like a follower in that environment and say, does this work? Would this bring out my best? Are these useful practices? What would need to change for me to thrive as an employee or as a follower on this team? And a servant leader, they thrive on that trait of empathy. The third is an aspect called healing. And that's an area, if I could be transparent with you, I had to learn. I used to go to work and say, well, it doesn't matter what we're all going through. We all have problems. And when we come into this office, we leave our problems at the door. And we've got to get things done as a team. I'm a super employee. I'm a super leader. I used to think that way. But then as I got older, I realized, oh no, people, who they are, they bring everywhere. Some of the personal challenges that they have, as much as we say it's unprofessional, we're all human. It's going to impact performance. It's going to impact perspective. It's going to impact diligence. It can even impact commitment, whether they can extend it or not. So one of the aspects of being useful to your team, remember, being useful is how you become great, is being able to find out in your context the appropriate ways for you to help individuals transcend personal problems. It's one of the ways to say, hey, man, I can see, the way you came in this office, you got the weight of the world on your shoulders. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know, because we care about you. It's just the ability to let a person know I can get healed here, corporately healed. I'm valued as a human, not just based upon what I do. If you can bring that to your team, it will begin to flourish, guaranteed. Also, awareness. You hear this term very often. I hope you're really catching all these nuggets. Make sure you share this podcast, subscribe to it, and check this out on Faith to Lead. But awareness, when you hear self-awareness, is how well do you accurately see yourself in the environment? It's sometimes as a leader, you may say, man, I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. I'm doing so much for everybody else, and they know how much I'm doing for them. And so when I'm being short or when I don't have time for them, they get it, they understand, and they appreciate. Is that true? Is everyone really aware of all that? The way you see yourself in your environment, is that the way all of your employees, your teammates, your followers see you? So self-awareness, it's knowing, it's seeing yourself accurately from the eyes and the viewpoint of others. It's knowing what to say, how to say it, when to say it, when to stop and pause, when to make the right read on yourself, when to exercise certain filters. What shouldn't I say to this person today? What should I say? What joke is over the line? At what point do I need to bring humor into a conversation? It's that ability to sense and see your environment, whether it's physical, social, the political environment, the corporate culture, and just being aware of what will put other people at ease based upon who you are as a person. Now, you may be saying, man, Aubrey, that sounds like a lot of stuff. Do I really have to do all that to be a leader? No, you don't have to do all that to be a leader, but to be a servant leader, someone who's useful to your team, someone who your team will look at and based on how you present yourself to them because you're prioritizing them, will say, you're the only one that should be leading this team. You are the kind of man or woman that I can follow. To be that servant leader, you're going to have to be aware. Also, there's a term that they call persuasion, and that's being precise and consistent and communicating to convince other people to change. I can't emphasize enough enough. One of the criticisms, I'm going to be transparent with you today, that I've gotten sometimes as a leader is they say, you know what, there's a lot of things that are wrong, but nothing's changing. I said, well, I can't change everything. Yeah, but you're the leader. You're the one that's supposed to go to other people and bring change. Well, how come you can't tell them to change? Well, you're the leader. They're looking to their leader to be useful to their environment because that leader is willing to persuade other people to do the right changes, to challenge those processes, to go to them and say how you are handling your other teammates is not working. I'm going to ask you to realign yourself to your teammates. And it's your gift and your skill set in being persuasive. That doesn't always mean being authoritarian. It doesn't mean commanding people. It doesn't always mean banging the table and dragging people outside and grandstanding. Sometimes being persuasive, it can be, hey, let me talk to you outside for a second. Hey, let's go out to lunch. And in that time away with them, it's sharing with that individual what they need to hear so that you can persuade them to buy into some of the changes that everyone else on their team recognizes needs to be made. That's how you can be useful. It's probably the opposite of being laissez-faire, hands off. Well, the team will figure it out all on its own. No, the team wants their servant leader to be persuasive. When you look at these other two, there's a few other behaviors that I really want you to grasp. Remember, these are things that you can do today. I've got to be persuasive. I've got to be aware. I've got to work on my ability to bring some healing to people. I've got to be empathetic. It's conceptualization. It's letting everyone on your team know that we have goals and letting them know what those goals are. There is nothing that drives people more crazy on a team than when they say, what are we here for? What are we trying to do? How do we know when we're winning and succeeding? How do we know when we're failing and need to improve? And when those lines, those boundaries aren't getting changed every day. So they want to see you or hear from you or the usefulness you can bring is by conceptualizing those goals and communicating those goals so that everyone stays on track so that they can operate freely. As a servant leader, one way you can be useful is to bring foresight, and that's being predictive, kind of sensing what can happen in the next couple months or years or the next quarters, and letting people know it doesn't matter what happens. We have an alternative scenario. We have a solution for what's coming down the pike. So you shouldn't have to worry about any of this. When you look at the last few aspects of servant leadership that I had the chance to check out, one was stewardship, and that's when you can accept the responsibility of managing people. That is literally not complaining about your role to the people who are following you. I can't tell you how many times you'll hear leaders say, it's not easy leading here. Running this team is hard. I don't know if I could do this every day. It's basically their way of saying, I don't accept some of this responsibility. I don't like it. I don't love it. I'm not into this. Accept it. You're leading that team for a reason. Consider yourself the right person. Think of everyone that put you in that position and realize I'm a steward to this role. I'm here to caretake this team. I'm here to guide this process. Someone has to do it, and you're the right one to do it. You also want to be committed to your team's growth. One of the things that you will specialize in as a servant leader, and one of the things you want to really make as an attribute of yours, is when you position yourself as the one that helps the team function well as a team, that you're going to put a premium on growing them personally and also collectively. That when you say, we have a group of individuals here, but what can these individuals do? What actions can we engage in? What communication is necessary to make our teamwork improve even more? You can take the same group of individuals and give them two different leaders, and that same team will perform differently. Why? Because one of them thrives on getting them to click together, to prioritize unity, and dedicated themselves to that task as much as any other task, because that will extend beyond even any aspiration your organization has. And the last point is you want to be the community builder. One of the most useful functions you can do on your team is to forge that sense of unity and that sense of relatedness amongst your team. You want to model it. You want them to see you do it, to see you get excited with their successes, to be patient with them in their times of challenge, to coach, to advise, but most of all, to model it. One of the worst things to do is to put together a team and then abandon it. You're off to yourselves. I put this team together and I'm done. Now you're still in that community. Now how you guide it will change as that team functions. You may come on more proactive and more directive, and then transition into guiding and coaching and then enabling and then empowering. So your roles to that community may change, how you function within it, but you'll always still be a part of it. You want to forge that sense of community. So those are some activities that when you look at yourself and you begin to value what type of leader you want to be, how can you move your organization? Think of each and every one of those things. How well you listen, how much empathy you exhibit, your levels of healing, awareness, and persuasion, foresight, your commitment to leadership, and your stewardship. All of those behaviors will move the needle. One of the hallmarks of my life is that when I look, I consider myself fortunate because I had a chance to work with some transcendent leaders. And some of those leaders, they still inspire me today. I remember early on in my career, I was working as an engineer, and it was a project to do a mass transit system. And what the state did is they brought in a project manager, but they brought him in from halfway across the country. And so I asked him, I said, why would you use this individual? Aren't there people in our own state that can do this? And someone said, no, there isn't. I said, this individual, he was flown around the country and to other countries to do mass transit systems because he was so excellent in going into environments and working with the best engineers in certain industries, in certain states, and in certain countries. And so I said, I got to see this for my own two eyes. I got to check this out. And when that individual came in, just how he conducted himself, how he managed the team, how he can forge unity amongst all of those different professionals was mesmerizing. And I can see why they brought him from state to state and say, if we're going to do this huge mass transit system, there's only one man that can lead it. When I look back, he was a servant leader because he knew how to make himself useful to every single state that he was in, to make himself useful in different countries that he was in, to different teams. And he was even useful to me. And when he was encouraging me to apply for licenses and different credentials, servant leadership works. I want to encourage you today, be the best leader you can be. Don't look at all these things and say, man, Aubrey, I'm failing. I can't do this. You can do it. Everyone's growing in it, and the scholarship is fresh. So I want you to go ahead and share this podcast with someone, subscribe to Faith to Lead. We have some additional resources on faith2lead.com where you can even do a one-page assessment that tests if you are a servant leader and what areas you can grow with. This is your time, your moment to grow, because as you grow, so will your organization. I want to thank you for being part of this conversation today. You can do this. You've got it. You're going to win. Thank you for joining us on Faith to Lead.